So today I wanted to take a look at Mark 15 verse 28. So this is the kind of next passage in those 16 or so verses that are in the King James Version, but not in the critical text. And so what I'm doing here is kind of coming from a Byzantine text perspective to see which verses would be considered part of the Byzantine text and which aren't. And of course, most of them, not all of them, but most of them would still be retained in the Byzantine text. So that's the same thing here with this passage we're talking about today. So if you're a Byzantine text person, or even a Textus Receptus person, this is easy for you, right? You would say Mark 15 verse 28 is part of the scriptures, and most of you are happy to leave it at that, and that's cool. But I've got to dig in on this one a little bit. So I'm still of the thought that this passage should remain in Scripture, absolutely. But this one was difficult from an external evidence perspective. We can still defend it, but it wasn't as easy as something like the last one we did. I think it was Mark 11:26. You know what? We're just going to dive straight in, and I'll show you what our modern translations are saying. But also, you'll probably want to see what passage we're talking about. So I've got us up here in the New King James Version. So this is Mark 15, verse 28. And it says, so the scripture was fulfilled, which says, and he was numbered with the transgressors. And of course, this is Jesus at the crucifixion. And people are, blaspheming him, slapping Jesus, all these things, right? All the stuff that Jesus endured on the cross. This is kind of the area of Scripture where that is. And so what the narrator is doing, Mark, right? He's basically referring us back to the Old Testament Scripture, specifically back to Isaiah, where Isaiah tells us, or where there's a prophecy concerning Jesus. So I have the reference to that here. So that's in Isaiah 53:12. I could pop over here. Why not? We could do it while we're up. So Isaiah 53:12, messianic prophecy. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul unto death, and he was numbered with the transgressors, and he bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors. So indeed, this passage is referring us back to this prophecy very specifically. Now, can I go back? Yes, I can. Perfect. If we also take a look at Luke 22:37, it's essentially referencing the same part in the narrative of Jesus' crucifixion. So, this isn't the narrative of his crucifixion. This is Jesus predicting his death. It says, and he said to them, when I sent you with money bag, knapsack, and sandals, did you lack anything? They said, nothing. This is Jesus to his disciples. Then Jesus said, so he said to them, but now he who has a money bag, let him take it, and likewise a knapsack, and he who has no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one. And then this is the passage here. For I say to you that this which is written must still be accomplished in me. This is Jesus. Now this is a really important point when we're talking about this from a textual critical perspective, right? In Mark, it's Mark narrating the passage, and here it's Jesus telling us the passage. So it's not Luke narrating; it's Luke. It's Luke recording what Jesus is saying, and Jesus says, and he was numbered with the transgressors, for the thing concerning me have an end. Now, it's important to recognize that this verse is used in Luke in a slightly different manner than it's used in Mark, and it's different as far as the way it's quoted, because what we're going to do is we're going to run into the same sort of idea here. The idea of a potential gospel harmonization is used here, and it's different enough that it's not stated to be a gospel harmonization. So that's important to keep in mind here, because there's still some interesting things going on here, but it's important to recognize that this is in other parts of the Scripture. This passage, this idea of being numbered with the transgressors, is referenced in other places, and there's, in a sense, if we don't have the passage from Mark, we have it from Luke, we have it in Isaiah. Now, you could make a case. You could make a case that it's important because if we remove it from Mark, then we have Mark as a narrator in the early centuries not pointing us back to Jesus. Not pointing this event of Jesus back to Isaiah. But nonetheless, let me see here. There it is. So the scripture was fulfilled, which says, and he was numbered the transgressors. So that's kind of like a general overview of some of the internal things. We're going to come back to the internal evidence, but just so you're aware, most modern translations do not contain that passage. The whole verse is just wiped out. Maybe that's a bit of a strong word. Let's take a look at some of the different Bible translations here. So, of course, we have the New King James Version, which has the passage here. We do have a footnote in here. So it's important to recognize in the New King James Version, textual notes are numbered, and then references to other passages are lettered, footnoted with letters. So we have the reference to Isaiah 53:12 here, as well as Luke 22:37. And then we have our textual footnote, which is what we want to know today. This one just simply says, the Nestle-Aland omits verses 28. NU, Nestle-Aland, UBS text, okay, omits the verse. And we know that. And we're going to see that in the ESV. So if we come to the ESV, we have verse 29. We have verse 27. But as has been done with the other whole verses, the ESV has just decided to totally omit the number and skip 28 and go straight to 29. So you go verse 26, 27, 29, right? People who are astute and catch that will be like, oh, where's verse 28? So they leave a footnote here. But the footnote in the ESV says, some manuscripts insert verse 28, and the scripture was fulfilled that says he was numbered with the transgressors. Again, we come down to the lingo that's used in the marginal notes, and what I've kind of come to the opinion of, especially after doing 4 or 5 of these, probably closer to 5 or 6 of them now, is the footnotes don't really do much for us. They're not really there to help us decide whether or not this passage should be scripture. All it's simply doing is basically saying there's an important variant here. That's really all it's saying. Because when you say some manuscripts insert verse 28, the reality is that, again, it's not some, it's most. So if you take a look at Pickering's F35 text in his apparatus, he has something like 88.7% of all manuscripts of Mark contain this passage. So it's not some, it's really most. Now, what's interesting about that number is 88.7% is actually on the low end. Most of these variants where the Nestle-Aland disagree with the Byzantine text, we typically see 90+%. So 88.7% of manuscripts containing this, and there's a reason for it, kind of made this a little bit difficult. Because I initially I was thinking, well, I'm just going to go in and I'm going to collect all the details and see a pretty easy way why this is in here. But that wasn't the case. It took a little bit of digging. So let's continue here. So the New American Standard 95. Again, if you're going to use a critical text Bible, I think the NASB is probably the best one to be using, because it includes these passages, even though it's in square brackets. You just ignore the square brackets and move on. But its footnote, it says early manuscripts do not contain this verse, and that's true. Early manuscripts do not contain this verse, but again, it comes down to what you mean by early, because I believe there's at least one 5th or 6th century manuscript which contains the passage, and 5th or 6th would be considered early. We have a number of early church fathers who quote the passage, so obviously there's something there that's early, and then some of the ancient versions contain the passage as well, and we'll go over that in a little bit. The New International Version, again, verse 27. Comes down to 28. This is, I don't know why this is so funny to me. They don't include the verse. They include the verse number. They put the verse number in brackets and then go right to 29 with a little footnote there. So you're almost better off. I guess it's good because at least there's something there other than a little footnote. Makes it look like it's part of the initial verse. But anyway, the note says some manuscripts include here words similar to Luke 22:37. And again, I've said this before, but this kind of sets you up with the idea that maybe this is a gospel harmonization, and I don't think necessarily we're seeing that. So some manuscripts, most manuscripts, right? Again, New Living Translation. So it's funny because with some of these in the Logos Bible, the Logos Bible app, web app. If you put in a verse that's missing, like 15:28, sometimes it doesn't go to there, and it'll just go to the start of the chapter. So you got to like either go to the verse before it or scroll down manually. But again, you have verse 27, skips verse 28, and goes straight to 29. Okay, so the footnote here, left for us in the New Living Translation, says, some manuscripts add verse 28, and the scripture was fulfilled that said, he was counted among those who were rebels. See Isaiah 53:12. Also compare Luke 22:37, which we did. The CSB, one more, and we'll take a look at the NET note. And you go down to verse 27. They crucify two criminals with him, one on his right and one on his left. And then it skips verse 28, goes straight to 29, and it leaves us with a note. Probably your bog standard. Some manuscripts include verse 28, and again, right? I sound like a broken record at this point. Some manuscripts really we're talking about a majority, and that majority is like 88%. If we were to be charitable with how these notes go in, I don't think it's anyone's prerogative to try to like turn anyone away from this evidence or anything. I'm sure people are wrestling with the question of how to put these footnotes in. But if we were to take it charitably, we would just say they're putting the note in here for the very purpose of drawing attention that there's some sort of important variant here. Because you wouldn't take the footnote and then be like, oh, okay, I like this footnote better, so I'm going to take this. No. What this should do is it should prompt you to look into this further, which is exactly what we're doing here. So the purpose and point of the marginal notes are just simply to alert the reader to say, hey, there's something going on here, go take a look. Yeah, you wouldn't want to base any final decisions off these notes. With that being said, not entirely an excuse, okay? They could be better. All right, so let's move on to the net translation. The New English Translation, again, we come to 1527 right here. And they crucified two outlaws with him, one on his right and one on his left, skipping verse 28, going straight to verse 29, and a footnote here. And the footnote is much bigger, and this is the purpose of the of the New English Translation, right? Again, I'm not particularly fond of the translation itself, but the footnotes I found to be helpful, even though they are from a critical text perspective. So you're going to get you're going to get that critical text bias. And what I have found with these notes so far, as we've been doing these 15 or so verses. I'm doing the Donald Trump accordion. What's going on here? Yeah, so what's going on with this is oftentimes the NET translation I find with their footnotes is almost verbatim what Bruce Metzger is saying in his commentary. We'll take a look at his commentary in a moment. The note says, most later manuscripts add 15 to 28. Okay, and finally, this is true. This is right. Most of them do, and I think this wording is great. There's a number of early ones too, but we'll get there. So it says, and the scripture was fulfilled that says he was counted with the lawless one. Verse 28 is included, and then he lists some of the references for its inclusion. There's actually a significant amount more amongst the unseals. I went and collected them. We'll take a look at them. So it's included in L, which is an important Alexandrian witness, Theta, 083 and 0250. I think that's like a 10th century. And then now this is interesting. I might have to check this. I didn't notice this because it was, oh wait, we're talking about inclusions. Yes. Inclusions. So L, Theta, 083, 0250, family 1 and family 13 are Caesarean witnesses much later. They're just small groups. Manuscript 33. Then we have the majority. We have the Latin. And then it says it's lacking. So then it goes on to show us some of the important witnesses where it's lacking, where we don't have this. It says it's lacking in important Alexandrian and Western manuscripts, plural. Interesting that they say Western manuscripts, plural, because I only found one Western manuscript, one Greek Western manuscript, and that's Codex D, which is just not a good quality manuscript. So it says the addition of the verse with its quotation from Isaiah 53:12 probably represents a scribal assimilation. Again, he's using the term assimilation here because it's not quite a harmonization. It's not exactly the same as the one in Luke. So it was almost certainly not in the original part of Mark's gospel. The present translation follows the NA, the Nestle Aland, in omitting the verse number, a procedure also followed by a number of other modern translations. That's like the same lingo that we've heard in the other manuscripts. So we are through taking a look at the English Bible translations. So I've got Metzger's stuff right here, ready to go. I'm going to just zoom it in a little bit more. There we go. So we got Mark 15:28 and omit verse and A. That means that they're pretty confident in their decision to say that this is not scripture. So I'll just read out what he says, and then we will go over some of the things that are saying along with some of the witnesses that we have. Okay, so 1528, Bruce Metzger, the most popular commentary on the text of the New Testament. Okay, says the earliest and best witnesses of the Alexandrian and the Western types of text lack verse 28. So no verse 28. It is understandable that copyists could have added the sentence in the margin from Luke 22 verse 37. Whence it came into the text itself, there is no reason why, if the sentence were present originally, it should have been deleted. It is also significant that Mark very seldom expressly quotes the Old Testament. So there's three claims that Bruce Metzger is making here. One is that it's understandable that it's likely that a copyist added the verse into the margin from Luke 22:37. Maybe I'm putting the mind of Metzger on, right? And I'm thinking, well, maybe this scribe, he just wanted to point to the prophecy and he's seen it in Luke because he's copied Luke how many times, right, in his career as a scribe. And then his second claim is that there's no reason why, if the sentence were present originally, it should have been deleted. So Metzger's saying there's no reason why it should have been deleted. And there is. We'll go over some of that. And then his third claim here is that Mark seldom expressly quotes the Old Testament. So what's interesting about that third item there, we'll take a look at it later, is that there's a kernel of truth in that. It's true that he seldom does this, but right? There's other parts to this, and there's a reason for it. And when we do comparisons with other gospels, it's not what we think it is. So let's take a look at the witness evidence first, because at first when I was going through this, I was thinking, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's not. And the evidence just seems so far stacked with it. So in the top portion, and most of this is taken from Wayne Mitchell's text, because he's got it nice and neat there. All this stuff is in the ECM. ECM lists like a tremendous amount more. So for this discussion, I'm really only concerned with the uncials. The ECM lists a bunch of minuscule manuscripts, and in the minuscule tradition, it essentially is there. So I think I've already stated that 88.7% is 88.7% is there. This first grouping of manuscripts I have here are all the manuscripts basically pre-10th century, which exclude the verse, which say, okay, this verse isn't scripture. So the reason why I'm making a big deal about Western types, plural, is because if you take a look at this list, you'll find that there's only one manuscript in this list that is considered a Western text type. Just one. It's not plural. It's not multiple. It's not many. It's not the Western text type favorite. No, it's one. On top of that, in addition to that, it's Codex D. And Codex D is not the greatest manuscript to be making these kinds of decisions. So if we're going to say that it's in the Western text type or any sort of singular thing related to Codex D, you're going to want to find something else to back that up, because Codex D is just wild. So we are going to give Metzger that there is one manuscript of the Western text type, but I find his plural use, or giving the impression, and this goes the same with the NET footnotes, with the NET marginal notes, to suggest that there's multiple Western manuscripts, I think is an error. So it's really just one right there, just one. And then we have Alexandrian witnesses, which is to be expected, which don't contain it. And then we have Byzantine witnesses that don't contain it. Now, if we take a look at the counts based on the centuries, this is what we get. We get those that are included, 2 4th century manuscripts, that's Aleph and B, Codex Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, or O1 and O3. We get 4 5th century manuscripts, and amongst the 4th and 5th century manuscripts, we don't have any manuscripts which, I mixed that up here. Hang on. There we go. There we go. So amongst the 4th and 5th century manuscripts, we don't have any that include it. We don't have any 4th century manuscripts or 5th century manuscripts that include it. And so when I saw this, I was thinking, man, maybe this is just not really so great. So you go down a little bit more, and among 6th century manuscripts, you have 2 that exclude the verse and 1 that include it. So it's not until the 6th century when you begin seeing this reading in the manuscript, in the Greek manuscript tradition. And then in the 7th century, we have 1. In the 8th century, we have 3. In the 9th century, we have 9. And then in the 10th century, we have 2, and probably more because the minuscules aren't counted in this list. So it looks like, just on the basic account, right, that, maybe this verse is like easily dismissed and we can remove it. But, not so easy. Not so easy. If we come back to our text type breakdown, again, this seemed to have indicated that perhaps it should be removed from the text. And this is where my mind was going, right? This is why I'm saying it was a difficult reading. Because when you look at the verses that include it, there were 11 Byzantine manuscripts and 3 Alexandrian manuscripts, 1 Caesarean manuscript, and 1 mixed manuscript. And I believe the mixed manuscript geared toward the Byzantine text for this specific reading in Mark. And then you look at the exclusions, and you have the Byzantine, the Alexandrian, and the Western. So it seems like a pretty even spread. And since we have most text types having an exclusion here, it almost looks as though this is heading into the direction of not being included in the scriptures. Then you take a look again at the reasoning that Metzger employs here when he's talking about this. Alexandrian and Western text types. Now, we already noted the Western, it's not multiple, it's just 1. It lacks verse 28. And he says, it's understandable that copyists could have added the sentence in the margin from Luke 22:37. This didn't bother me, right? And the reason why is because this is just simply speculation. Unless we can provide a manuscript which produces this reading in the margin, this is just fanciful imagination. Maybe a way to try to explain how it got in there. But again, there's no evidence, nothing to suggest that. It's just a story. But this is where you take the manuscript evidence in place and you read this. And once it came into the text itself, there is no reason why. You look at that and you go, well, it does seem rather interesting that if this weren't part of the text, there's no reason why it got in there. And you think, okay. And so my mind is kind of thinking on this round, and as I began looking at that, I did find a reason why, if it was there, it could have been removed. We'll talk about that in a second. And then you take the third item here, which he talks about how Mark seldom expressly quotes the Old Testament, which is true. And so you factor all of this stuff together, and all of a sudden it's very difficult. Don't know how to defend it. Maybe it's not part of Scripture, and then that would probably be the end of the road for most people who take a look at text critical matters from a critical text perspective, right? They're satisfied with that answer. But if we dig just a little bit further, we can come up with a very plausible defense of this passage.